Hey, readers! Welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are very excited to have you here with us today for our second discussion of the Posthumous Memoirs of Cubas. And also to remind you to check the description if you guys are interested in our next book, which will be Shadow of the Wind. We'll be really excited to start that with you guys next month. But before we get on to talking about the Posthumous Memoirs, I do want to discuss something with you, Leandra, something from last episode. So, our bookish bite of the week is going to be surrounding the word boredom, because that's one of the words that you use to describe how you were feeling last week with this book, that you were bored. So, I just kind of want to dive into that term. What do you mean when you talk about being bored? Is it something that you can push through, or eventually something that causes you to stop reading books? Just give me your thoughts.
Yeah, I am actually really fascinated by that term, especially because it's so mundane in itself, right? Boredom, it doesn't seem like that special of a term, but we use it quite frequently, whether we are describing the book as being boring, right? If we're having a bad time, we're not interested in the narrative, we might blame the narrative. And so then we end up saying that the book is boring. Or sometimes I think about it in a different way where if I say that I am bored with a narrative, then I'm acknowledging that maybe I'm the denominator. Maybe I'm the thing that needs to be removed from the situation, and someone else who reads this book will absolutely adore it. And they would argue that no, the book isn't boring. I'm actually having a great time. So this is, a subjective type of experience, which I think a lot of us can agree. Reading is subjective. So I try to be careful, or at least I try to be mindful when I'm saying that a book is boring, because that is saying that nothing can change. It doesn't matter what reader reads this book, it will always be boring. But with that said, I do stick by my guns. I think I did call the Posthumous Memoirs boring. I do not think I blamed myself on that one, and maybe we can reflect on that later. But when it comes to boredom, what I mean by that is I feel as though the narrative is not really pushing forward. And there can be the consideration of investment, of maybe there not being enough action, but I do think that boredom is linked to plot. And so when I'm feeling bored, it means as though I don't think that anything has happened. And I think that's also something we say a lot, right? When we say that we're bored, a lot of times we say, nothing has happened. These characters haven't done anything. They haven't actually learned anything. What are we doing here? We feel as though nothing has moved. There's been no
Yeah.
progress in any way, whether it be for the conflict, for character development. And so maybe that would be my way of saying boredom, is that nothing has moved. It feels as though we've just been sitting in the same chair, that we've been flipping the pages, but have we? Because nothing's happened. So I don't know if I'm really answering it appropriately, but that's kind of my definition of boredom when I say that I'm bored. How about you?
Yeah, I think I would agree. It's definitely, I can also be bored if something is repetitive. So stuff might have happened, but it's the same stuff over and over, and we're not ever getting anything new or any development. So it's like we are stuck in the same, whether or not it be, if it's a romance, the same relationship, troubles, or if it's a fantasy world, maybe we are constantly combating the same evil. I feel like I can get bored with a storyline if there's not enough for me to grab onto. And I also agree that it's probably more of a plot driven thing. Um, and with that, I think that I can be okay with boredom. I can be okay with it meandering, the plot meandering, if I care about the characters, because then I don't care. I can be bored with somebody. I can get to know them a little bit. I think that it probably happens less often when I really care about the characters, because then I don't find the story boring. And so I do think there's a little bit of character-ness within boredom as well. But I do think that I'm less likely to get bored if we have a fast-paced storyline. I can not like something and still not be bored with it. I can also be bored with something and like it. So I think I'm okay with both. However, if I get to the point that I say I'm bored, the book is kind of on thin ice at that point in time, I think. I think I would be less likely to continue on with a story when I'm bored if I have nothing else pulling me to that next page.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point in the idea that an entire book doesn't have to bore you, right? But there can be scenes. There can be
Yes.
chapters,
There can be
lulls, you might
characters.
call them. Yes, characters' perspectives where you like, I am bored every time this character comes on page, but I am excited. I'm emotionally invested in the other characters, or when the scenes also pick up. And also the fact that you kind of mentioned this idea of repetition, either in plot or even in language. Like there have been
Yeah.
times when I realize an author has used a certain term a million times. I mean, for this book, maybe we would use saucy as an example, although I think that one's more grating than boring. But there have been times when we've read a book and we just feel as though, what are we doing here? You've described this thing 10 times. We get it. We love a theme, but that theme has to be varied within it. You can't literally provide me regurgitating the same words over and over again, because then you start to feel deja vu. And that's also a bit of a risk. I actually think that what's interesting is we've had this discussion before, and you realized a pattern. You mentioned that it seems as though, not always, this isn't a guarantee, but the types of books that might lean in the boring category for you are gothic and cozy. And I do think that those tend to be more character driven narratives. And so if you aren't invested in the characters, if you aren't really enjoying it, then you aren't okay with the boring plot, right? Because it's supposed to be a slow burn. So it feels like we're kind of going around in circles as we discuss this as well. But yeah, like if you did like the characters in this gothic tale or in this cozy tale, then we're okay. That's fine. Let's take our time. Let's meander. But if you're losing that, then you're just thinking, I have nothing to cling to. I actually don't want to be bored with this character. I want to be bored with my favorite character. We can be bored together. That sounds like a great time, actually. But yeah, I know what you mean. And also, boredom isn't necessarily automatically a criticism. Like, it doesn't have to be the end all scenario. And I'm glad that you said that.
Yeah, a book that actually came to mind that I absolutely love as you were talking was The Goblin Emperor, because
Mm.
I imagine if some people read that and they don't like the political dynamics, the kingdom dynamics that come into play within that, that story is probably very boring because you are following someone who's never been trained to be emperor, navigating this field of politics. And I just absolutely loved Miye. Miye's character was phenomenal, being in his head, talking about him kind of exploring being in power and not really knowing what to do or who to turn to. I just thought he was so sweet. But if you weren't invested in him, that story in its chunky, it would be brutal to get through because you would just be like, I don't care. I'm so bored with what's happening. Where's the action at? Whereas with me, I was just like, la di da. I love living with Maya.
You know what? Yeah, now that you've brought that up too, it makes me want to come up with some titles where, yes, there were moments of boredom, or at least I can understand why people might say it's boring, but I still enjoyed it. And for me, I start to think about eco fiction or books that are very heavily related into maybe like following scientists, scholars, discussing linguistics or language. Because I'm happy to just sit here for, an entire chapter, pages upon pages where we discuss, phonetics and those types of things. Talk about syntax, please. And I'll admit it's dry. It is a dry topic, but I'm invested in the topic. So I'm okay with us discussing it, because I think that that's a criticism with Into the Drowning Deep, actually, which is a horror, but it's a chonky horror. And the reason why it's chonky is because a good amount of the time we are learning about the characters and we are taking our time in every scientific ability they have, like all of their skills, and getting to know them. But speaking of boredom, we should probably discuss the book that is this month's choice, and that is The Posthumous Memoirs of Cubas. This is the episode in which we should be 2/3 of the way through the narrative, and that means we should have started at chapter 33 and ended all the way at chapter 91. I will provide a bit of a brief synopsis to the best of my ability while not providing, huge spoilers in any form. But basically, where we kind of left off is that Cubas has left, returned Brazil, and he ends up being by the side of his mother's deathbed. He does end up losing her. It's anticipated. She's terminal. And then we just kind of see him in his young to mid adulthood building his life. He socializes a lot. There's a lot of women on his roster, as they might say. And it seems as though after basically being exiled and then coming back, he now is returned into his father's good graces, and anything his father says kind of goes. To my understanding, for instance, his father wants him to get into politics. So now he's starting a political career. But with that said, he is trying to figure out his own, I suppose, attraction towards various women. And he ends up getting entangled with a married woman. And unfortunately, that's kind of where the summary ends, friends, because we're going to hold your hand figuratively as we say this. But Danny and I have decided to DNF this book. Say it ain't so, but we did end up getting to the end of chapter 63. So when we say, you're supposed to get to the end of 91, don't worry about it. So if you want to stick around and chat with us, maybe try to get to the end of 63 and chat with us at that point. But we don't have to worry about any major spoilers towards, the end of this book, because we're done, friends. It is what it is. But we will have a thorough discussion as to why we ended up DNFing it. And actually, between the two of us, Danny, you were the first one to DNF. So I am going to pass the torch on to you.
Yes, I did DNF first because the night after our first recording, I decided just to rip the Band-Aid off and continue my read. I read, I don't remember how many hours, but I got to the point where we started to have the infidelity, and we can go into details about everything that's happened, but I'll just describe my experience with giving up on this book. We got to the infidelity. Well, first we got to, I think it was Eugenia that he was originally kind of courting. There were plans of marriage, which is when his dad gets in the picture, tells him to come home. And he literally talks about how he can't stay. He doesn't want to stay, and almost feels like his father saved him in this moment because he doesn't want to be with a crippled woman. So that was part of my frustration. And then it just gathers, because then he talks about Marcella, who was his original love that he, threatened to kill himself over in the first set of pages that we read. Talks about how horrible she looks now. And then now he falls in love with Virgilia, but she is a married woman. He discusses how she is literally on this earth for him, to make him happy. And then he tries to convince her to run away with him, and gets mad because her husband treats her really well and like absolutely adores her. And I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't. I was so mad by the end of the pages that I finished. I was like, I can't. And I gave myself a good hour before I text you and was like, I just want to let you know that I'm done. Like, I can't. I'm done reading this book. I'm not happy. So I would say my reasoning for DNFing this is not because I was bored, but because I was furious with where our main character went. I hate him. I hate him with the fiery passion of 1,000 suns, and I never want to hear his name again.
Yeah, we need to erase this title from our brains. Cubas, no, we shall never speak of him again. No, you know what? I'm glad that you were the first one to do it, to be honest, because obviously there were suggestions in our last episode that I was already kind of done with this book. And I was just like, how far can I get into this? And can I be okay with DNFing it if you keep going? Like, I felt as though I was like leaving you to the sharks. And I was like, oh no, I can't. I want to prove that I'm giving this my best shot. And then as soon as you said that you DNF'd, I was like, okay, cool. I've got a benchmark. I know where, like, I can see the lights. I know how far I've got to get, and no chapter further. I even said that. I was like, okay, so that's where I'm going to stop. I'm not, we don't need to expect me to go any further. So yeah, no. And I honestly, I felt the same way about you, or about you, as you, goodness gracious. I felt the same way as you. And it was part of, for me, I was no longer feeling the fury or the frustration. I was just honestly completely disconnected. I almost was going through the motions. Maybe that helped that I knew that we were ending this, that we were DNFing. And so I was just like, okay, let's just hit the highlights. I don't actually have to feel anything, because I know that there's an end time. Like, I'm not going to force myself. So there is the acknowledgement of that. But I also was truly just bored with the narrative. I actually did not care about his life. I didn't like the narrative style. I felt as though it was plotting. And like we said before, maybe if you were invested in the characters, and I wasn't invested in him either. And I will say that as I was trying to figure out how to summarize this section, I was realizing, and you brought up, the various women that he is attracted to or not attracted to for various reasons. And I was just like, every single woman that is in this book is either dying or there is some type of imperfection that he zeroes in on and can't oversee, or it's a woman that he wants to possess. That's literally all it's about. And yes, we are interacting with men too, but we have the wife on the boat who is slowly dying of tuberculosis/consumption. Then we have him returning home. His mother is dying of cancer, and there's also not a really positive description of her at the beginning of the book either. And as you were listing off these three women, he is attracted to this one woman until he realizes that she has a limp. So ableism, love it. Love to see that. And that's sarcasm for those who can't hear that in my voice. But he does end up kind of contemplating the various times he sees her and how he's like, how did I not notice this before? Was it purposeful or was it by chance? As if they were trying to hide this from him. And it's like, you would obviously find out eventually. So anyways, so that seemed a bit kind of paranoid of him. And yeah, Marcella, as you said, this woman that he adores, as soon as she has her scars from smallpox, not a thank goodness she survived because she could have died. He is just saying, oh, well, she's ugly now, in my opinion. And so, whoop, dodged a bullet. And yeah, the fact that the woman that he loves, that he thinks should be his, he resents her for making a choice. This one woman who actually has agency, and she, of course, also is probably pushed by her family, but she's content with the man that she ends up setting up with being married. She views this as a positive life. Obviously, she's not fully, in the clear because she welcomes an affair with him as well. But this, I guess, it's not that I was surprised that this is a woman-centered narrative, because we do kind of get that at the beginning when we're discussing his various erotic love affairs or whatever the synopsis tried to sell to us. Goodness gracious. But yeah, I think that it's interesting that we hate this man so much, and he has so many opinions about the women in his life.
Yeah, he's great.
He's the best. Love him. But yeah, no, it didn't feel like it was worth it for us to keep going. And for those listening who are possibly enjoying the narrative or they're interested, maybe they're not people who readily DNF and you're thinking, I'm going to push to the end. We respect that choice. Yeah. But it doesn't make sense for us to keep reading a narrative that neither of us are enjoying, that we're getting infuriated by. And we also just need to have the substance to talk about that. And I don't think we have the energy or the content enough from the narrative that is worth it discussing. Because also in this podcast, we've discussed books that we have not liked in thorough detail. We've provided you with almost hour-long episodes at times. Books include The Village Library Demon Hunting Society. I hate that I still know that title by heart because we had to say it so many times. We did not like that book. Spoiler, if you didn't go back and listen to those earlier episodes. At the same time, The Games Gods Play. That was another one that by the end, we had only criticisms for that narrative. And yeah, we had quite a bit to discuss, but I just don't think we have enough to discuss that would be interesting to any of us, let you and me or anyone listening. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Oh yeah. I only have one other thing I want to talk about, and then I literally have no other thoughts.
Okay, please.
What was the chapter, the telekinetic dream chapter where there was like question marks and exclamation points and him saying her name over and over again with no response? That was such a weird chapter for me, especially because this was written in the 1800s. It seemed very much like what I would see on like a text message bubble, like mixed media type of books. That's kind of how it felt to me. I did not read that chapter through the physical edition. I only had the audiobook, but I remember reading it and being like, I don't understand what's happening, but I don't care enough to go back and re-listen.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it in my ebook because I also Oh, I found it. All right. For those interested, it is chapter 55. And because I've got the same ebook as your audio, it was titled The Age Old Dialogue of Adam and Eve. What? Okay. Yeah, because they were speaking to each other in text message or telekinetic form, because it is designed like that. It's almost designed as like a play or a screenwriting where we have the, Bras Cubas, and then his dialogue is ... question mark. And then Virgilia. So they're not even saying each other's names. The reason why the audio is saying their names is to tell us who the next speaker is. And they're saying nothing because her response is ... This does feel like a text message. Oh my gosh. This is it literally. So I ended up, hitting my e-reader to the next page, and it is honestly just a bunch of dots. It truly is. If you are only listening and you're not watching on YouTube, feel free to go to the YouTube episode to see that, because yeah, all it is ... exclamation point ... exclamation point. And then we
And
just
that's
continue to
what
the
was
next
read
chapter.
to us via that's what was read to me via audio. And I was like, I'm very confused as to why this is even in here. It literally gives us nothing. There's no information. There's no words. It's just ... dots and exclamation points. And I did kind of figure that they weren't saying each other's names, but I don't understand
You know what's
what's
funny?
happening.
So I ended up going off onto my audio, and because my audio was different, the audio narrator just read the names. So that chapter was just Bras Cubas, Virgilia, Bras Cubas, Virgilia. And I was like, is this the telekinetic thing she's talking about? Because all he's saying is their names back and forth. Yeah,
What?
yeah, truly. That obviously that audio narrator was like, I'm not playing around with this. Like, actually, I don't even feel like wasting my time with this. So I'm not gonna say it. Because we were talking about question marks. I'm like, how did she know that there were question marks? Like, was it the inflection? Yeah, no, I don't understand it either. And it feels out of place, even though obviously this is a classic. As we said, it was from the 19th century, but it's one of those situations where it does take you out of the narrative because it doesn't feel like it should be there. And I suppose there is a phenomena about that where people discuss how they're reading a book, and if there is this mention of a certain device that your brain doesn't tell you it should be there, you'll be like, oh, that's a modern thing. And it's like, well, no, that did exist, in that time. We just don't attribute it to that. And I don't know what that's called. And that's not necessarily what's going on here. It's not like we're seeing him pull out a cell phone and, it shows that she left him on red. But, there is kind of this like telekinetics. What? Like, I'm sure that has been a concept for quite some time. This idea of like reaching out to someone's mind, but it does feel out of place, like it wasn't invented yet, you know?
Yeah, I agree. That was bizarre. I would say that that was the beginning of the end, but it wasn't. That was like towards the end of the end.
Yeah, I feel like for me, again, you had already started, so I already knew that you were, done. But as soon as he brought up Eugenia's limp and that type of thing, and just kept harping on it, and then Marcella, all he could talk about was her smallpox scars. And I just, that's when I was like, why do I care about this man's opinion? You know what? I'm convinced. I know why he died alone. I know why only 11 people came to his funeral. Like, I actually don't need to read any further to be convinced more. I get it. I know why he's where he is. We're done. So, yeah, it's just what's fascinating to me, and it's really funny. I promise I'm not being like insulting or kind of like a, what is it called? Like condescending or whatever it is. But like, it's fascinating that some people love this. Is what I'm trying to like. I don't know what people gather from this that we're missing, or that we don't cling to, that there's something that is investing other people that we just feel complete disconnection from. And I do think that there may be a suggestion that some readers, it's easier for them to just read through the archaic views or the misogynistic views, you know, because some of these views are modern as well, like the sexism,
Oh,
the
yeah.
ableism, like people have those views today, unfortunately. The racism that we saw in the earlier section, too. And for me, I just feel like I'm wasting my time. I don't know why I would want to experience all of those things on top of it being the most boring narrative that I've ever experienced, respectfully slash disrespectfully.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like this book, I don't want to read it, and I DNF'd it probably quicker than I would had I not had other books on my docket that I was really excited to read. But I can say with my whole heart that if this was the only book that was available to me right now, I would be much happier going on a silent walk and not having anything to read than reading this book. Like, it was depressing my soul. And I mean, maybe that's not saying much because I like silent walks as well. Like, everyone needs like a little meditation walk every once in a while. But I'm just saying, like, if this is the only book left, I don't think I would care to read it.
The only book left in the world. Like, if this was a dystopian, if we were living in a dystopian world and you only had enough battery left to listen to this audiobook, you only had access to it for some reason, you're like, I'd rather not. I'd rather go walk through the world without an audiobook. And I feel that we're very fortunate that we have a bunch of other books to read, and that, you know, our lives are bookishly full. We're fine. It does feel stressful at times. And I feel like that also can be something that we acknowledge, that when we have a lot of other books on our plate, a lot of other projects. I mean, both you and I have jobs outside of this podcast. We also have our own booktube types of, like, you know, videos that we're working on, vlogs. And so when we've got those things going on, and we also have books that we'd rather read, you truly do feel like you need to consolidate your time, and you're thinking, this is a waste of my time. This doesn't make sense to do this when I could be focusing on other projects. And I can totally feel that. And no, there have been times when I feel as though, and this kind of also speaks to maybe reading slump area, where there are no books that I'm enjoying, and I'm just like, I guess I'm going to drive to work in silence. Truly, I'm like, I don't want to put anything on, and so I'm just going to drive to work in silence. Or then, of course, I suppose I could, you know, resort to music, right? We could probably put the radio on or something like that. But I felt that when you said it, I was like, yeah, that's the perfect description of how I felt as well.
Yeah. Well, it is time to answer our 3 questions. It's gonna be an interesting version of this,
Mm-hmm.
because we've never DNF'd on our podcast before, so this is definitely a first. So I guess my first question will be, and you answered first last time, so maybe I'll answer first this time, and then you can just follow suit. So I think I'm going to adjust the first question that we say as far as ratings go, and whether or not we are going to rate, because sometimes we rate our DNFs and sometimes we don't. What are we going to do? So in my case, I am not going to rate this book. I am just going to put it in my DNF category and hopefully never think about it again. I might take the time to write a review. Honestly, I kind of just don't want to give it any more of my time. So I might not. But yeah, I don't think I will be rating it, because I feel like if I did rate it, I would need to write a review to justify my low rating, because it would not get more than a 1 star for sure. And because it's a classic, I just feel like I would need to justify. Not that I need to justify. I'm not saying that I should justify. I just feel like I would want to justify it because it's a classic. For the second question, we normally ask about our favorite character.
Well, this might be the hardest question to answer in history.
um Pass. I'm
Yeah,
just
maybe, you know what? How about, well, you've already answered this, but we've had a few weird moments. What is the ultimate weirdest moment in this book for you?
Oh, it's for sure the dot dot dots. I
Mm.
don't understand the dot dot dots. Why is
Mhm.
that even in there? What purpose does that hold in the whole story? That's, yeah, super strange. And then the third question, what questions do we still have or do we wish that were answered in the story? And the question I have is, why do I care? Why was this a thing? Why is this book so renowned? Because even though it's not a story I think I've heard a ton of people talk about, I have heard enough people talk about it. And the fact that it was written in 1880 something or published in 1880 something and it's still being talked about today. I'm like, what about this book? And I just need to go and look at other people's reviews and see what they really enjoyed about it. But I don't understand. I am at a loss, friends.
Well, I will answer those same questions to the best of my ability. And I know what you mean when there's a hesitance to DNF and still rate. That's something that's new to me only in the last year. And it's kind of sad to say, but I've been motivated to start rating my DNFs because there are some DNFs that I absolutely abhor. And I see that their ratings are like 4.2 something stars with like hundreds of thousands of ratings. And I'm like, there needs to be a few more 1 stars here. So I will be a part of the cause. But then, like you said, I feel like I need to explain, not just because this is a classic, but in general, to mark this as a DNF, to say 1 star, I feel like you do need to possibly put down when you DNF'd, if that's, something that is important to acknowledge, and why. So what was in this book? What was in this book that not only led you to DNF, but felt you like gave you the motivation to truly like give it a rating? Because I feel like when I see that, I'm thinking, "Ooh, there must have been some bad stuff in there, and we need to address it. Like, we actually should talk about this." And so for me, I probably will DNF and rate and provide my explanation, but it won't be as thorough. I've decided that the lower the rating, I guess it depends on how much I hate it, but the lower the rating, the less time I should take to really bother with a review, because I obviously just hate it. Unless I feel like you said, I need to defend, provide receipts, because I will do that. But usually I'm kind of having fun with providing the receipts. And this one, I just don't care. So yeah, friends, you're going to be seeing me give this 1 star happily, because yeah, like you said, because it's so highly rated, there needs to be some voices that say, no, actually, you know, if you want to be careful, you may agree with me, rather than the people who love this. And I was wondering, because there's also the weird scene of the hippopotamus.
Nope, the dot dot dots are worse for me.
See, you know what though? I did find the hippopotamus and Pandora kind of entertaining, even though I didn't know what was going on. I was kind of like, okay, this is kind of funky. Where yeah, the dot 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 stuff just went over my head. But I also, the reason why it went over my head was because the voice narrator only read aloud people's names, and then we just moved on, and I just was sitting there being like, this chapter had him recite people's names 10 times, and that was it. Like that's all. So that maybe is why it didn't impact me as much, because it was so brief. I didn't even really notice it. And then as far as like my questions are, like you said, like why is it so well renowned, and where is this book end, like where is this book going? Because we know, the thing is we know he dies. We know we're
Yeah.
going to get to the end of his life. So what even, like what is like a pivotal, like what would be like the third act conflict resolution, like what even is going to be the climax of this book? And I'm actually really asking that rhetorically. Don't tell me, I don't care. So yeah, this is a joke question, because I don't want the answer. So yeah, and this actually, because we're ending our discussion of this book here, we do have to acknowledge the schedule, friends, because technically, as we typically do with Not Reading for Content, we would have one more episode. We would be discussing the final third of the Posthumous Memoirs of Cubas. And instead, we have decided to provide you with another bonus episode, which will be more fun for you, more fun for us. And we are still open to hearing your thoughts. So if you're a listener who has decided to read this book into the completion, let us know. What was your rating? How were your reactions? Would you disagree with us on our choice to DNF? Because that's also an opinion. But our plan is for next week to come back with a bonus episode where we are providing you with a few recommendations that are translations, per the theme of season 2, but also discussing maybe a few books that are on our radar that are translations that we haven't read, but for one or two reasons it might be interesting to us. So thank you all for getting to the end. We do really appreciate you, even though this didn't end up, reaching the end that we hoped. And we hope to see you in the next one. Happy reading if you're reading Bras Cubas or anything else. Bye!
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.